I've talked to you about this FACE program and about how very excited that we were to get to go and how many things that we had planned to do.
Perfect isn't possible, but try to tell that to a child. Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline.
And I think part of each of us goes up with every shuttle launch, and part of us died with the crew of the Challenger yesterday.
Our focus tonight, the effect on children of witnessing a national tragedy. Don Mullen was one of Christa McAuliffe's students. Eileen O'Hara is a friend who's been substituting in Mrs. McAuliffe's classes. They'll join us live tonight along with two leading experts on the psychological impact of disaster.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
It was only one of thousands of television images that flashed across our screens today. A grade school teacher discussing yesterday's shuttle explosion with his class. How many of you, he asked, had trouble sleeping? And even as he finished the question, he raised his own arm to signify that last night had been a very bad night for him. Every child in the classroom, without exception, raised a hand. It's possible, of course, that every one of those children had nightmares or trouble falling asleep last night. It's also possible that some of them were simply reacting with what they sensed was the correct response, the expected thing to do. The impact of yesterday's disaster on children is of sufficient concern to NASA that the Space Agency is convening members of its Educational Affairs Division tomorrow afternoon to discuss measures, including the use of television, to help children handle the emotional stress of what happened yesterday. As Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield reports, it was one of those events that becomes an emotional marker to a generation.
The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
In every lifetime, there are moments which, once experienced, will never be forgotten.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead.
Repeating this bulletin received at WQMR from the United Press. A sniper has fired at President Kennedy.
We'll throttle down to 65% shortly.
The millions of American school children who watched yesterday's launch of the Challenger shuttle will never forget what they heard and saw.
Obviously a major malfunction.
A lot of good people died in that wreck, and
this is one of the biggest tragedies I've ever seen in my life.
What happens to these children who are confronted with sudden, violent, graphic death, literally in front of their own eyes? What can we expect them to think, to feel? What questions will they ask of us? And what answers are we able or willing to give them?
My boys and girls, I put down the aim of the lesson to share our feelings about the tragedy of the Challenger and the...
They talked about that in Marion Luthen's 5th grade class in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey today. They talked about what had happened and what happened to them.
I don't think it's like so great to be up in space anymore. And I think that they should stop putting civilians up in space until they make a better shuttle that won't blow up.
Well, I used to want to be an astronaut, but after yesterday, I don't know anymore because I might turn out as unfortunate as Mrs. McAuliffe was.
A teacher is very important to children after their parents, probably in most cases the second most important adult in their lives. And she, Miss McAuliffe, represented symbolically someone who is close to every child.
They talked about that today in Concord, New Hampshire, where Christa McAuliffe lived and worked.
It's like, it hurts so much that, because it's not fair. And don't know why it should happen.
Yeah, I turned to my friends and my parents. My mom also saw it. And we talked about it for a long time. And we cried about it. And it was really hard, but I think I've got it all out now. And I can learn to live on now.
And at Santa Fe Elementary School in Moore, Oklahoma, Carolyn Snavely, who wanted to be the first teacher in space, was teaching the hardest lesson of her life today.
We did see something very tragic and very real, and could have been me.
For children, death, especially sudden death, lays bare the fear that lies in the heart of every mortal man and woman.
I think every child wonders, will this happen to my parent? Can a tragedy like this happen again? How vulnerable am I to this? Because most children view their parents and other authorities, like teachers and space officials, as omnipotent, as capable of protecting them from all sorts of dangers.
That's a special concern for child psychiatrist DARRELL GRIFFITH, who works in Houston, close by NASA's Johnson Space Center. 6 crew members who died on board the Challenger yesterday lived here.
You know, our children here know the children of the parents that died yesterday. And it really, very acutely confronts them with death and the fragility of life, I guess, also.
It confronts them as well with a horribly vivid picture of what happened, a picture that will raise questions grown-ups may shrink from facing, questions we have to learn how to answer.
Dad, what happened to those people? They died. Their bodies were destroyed. They are no more.
They tried to speak to those fears in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey today, those 5th graders trying to put it down in words on paper.
I couldn't describe how I felt. I felt scared and sad, and I just felt so sorry for her children. Last night I could not go to sleep. I kept on thinking that, what if that was my mother or father? I killed myself. I hope something like this will never happen again.
I think we should encourage them to do something about it, to overcome that feeling of helplessness, to express your grief to those families, write to them, write to the people who are involved in this, and perhaps think of ways in which we can memorialize these people. They are indeed heroes.
This is an inspiration to all of us to always be willing and eager to expand our knowledge and to have new experiences. Life is a chance that we were all given to be what we want to be, create our own dream, and aim for what you want. There'll always be that chance that you won't make it, but you won't ever know if you don't try.
The experts we talked with today all say there's a responsibility and an opportunity now to let our children know that their sorrow is real, that we, like they, feel the anguish and the loss. But that only makes our job harder, to admit to them that in the midst of life there is death, to admit to them that we do not know why, to admit to them that the burden they bear now, many for the first time, will be with them as an inescapable, inevitable companion for the rest of their lives. This is Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
When we come back, we'll go live to Concord, New Hampshire to meet 2 people who were at Christa McAuliffe School when triumph suddenly turned into disaster. EILEEN O'Hara was a close friend of Mrs. McAuliffe, and she's been teaching in her behalf this year. Don MULLEN is a former student of Mrs. McAuliffe. We'll talk with them both in a moment. Among students around the country who watched yesterday's tragedy unfold on television, none felt it more directly than students at the New Hampshire high school where Christa McAuliffe taught. Joining us now live from Concord, New Hampshire is EILEEN O'Hara. She's been substituting for Mrs. McAuliffe at the school since September and had been a close friend for 5 years. Also joining us from Concord, Don MULLEN, a senior at Concord High School, captain of the track team, and a former student of Mrs. McAuliffe. I want to address this question to both of you, but Ms. O'Hara, perhaps you would answer it first. As perhaps most of our viewers do not know, you had another tragedy at that high school, about a month and a half ago. A student was brandishing a gun at the school. Police had to come. The student was shot. The student was killed. The reason I raise it is, obviously, a lot of people, a lot of teachers, a lot of students knew that youngster. What is the difference between that death and the death that we all witnessed yesterday? What is the difference in terms of the effect that it had on you?
I personally didn't know the student who was in the incident before. I was in the classroom that was as far away from the office as it can be. And he happened to take 2 students hostage, and it was very traumatic for people down by the office. Students who knew him were very, very upset. And I personally felt quite removed from it because I am new to the school this year, And I didn't know the student, and I didn't know the students who were being held hostage at that time.
All right, well then let me address the question to Don Mullen. Don, did you know any of the people involved?
I had never known Louis or his two hostages. I was in Miss O'Hara's room at the time of the incident occurred. And I think one of the major differences is, one, that none of us, like on the third floor, actually saw Louis get shot. And it wasn't so traumatic for me because I didn't really understand what happened. But seeing Miss McAuliffe's space shuttle, it was something that made it more traumatic for me because I actually saw it happen. And I know that
I guess maybe my question seems a little bit too obscure, so let me explain what I'm driving at. Death is around us at all times. Sometimes it comes into our very midst, as it did in your school, but there is something about the death of those 7 people yesterday, and obviously for all of you in Concord, there is something about the death of Christa McAuliffe that is totally different, and I'm wondering if somehow you can explain that to us. Don, you want to take a crack at it?
Mrs. McAuliffe just had the personality which you opened up to, and everybody loved Mrs. McAuliffe. She appealed to such a wide variety of people that it was just so hard. It is so hard to think that we're going to have to live without this girl, this lady, a remarkable woman.
All right, Ms. O'Hara, you want to try and take a crack at the same question? I'm wondering what it is that is causing the nation as a whole. Obviously, we shared in it in the sense that we all saw it. But most of us didn't know her, didn't know any of those people.
Right, I think that she brought something very personal to the job that she was doing. I think that she had a lot of energy, and she, as the person in the clip that you showed before mentioned, she symbolized to people someone who cared about kids and who cared about teaching. And she had a kind of vitality, I think. I know for myself personally that she sent pictures to the school through me. So I spoke to her frequently in Houston and learned about the other people on the shuttle with her. And I think that a lot of the things that she did well and did vocally. And I think that a lot more people were in touch with this shuttle much more than any other thing. To compare it with the incident at the school, the students who were the most touched were the ones who knew the students involved. This is different. We all feel like we knew Christa.
Yeah. See if you can explain to me, you, Ms. O'Hara, from the vantage point of teacher, and you, Don, from the vantage point of student, how you think folks are handling it. How are they handling the trauma, even in this, what, 36 hours now since the event? Have you seen any change at all? Are people beginning to adjust?
I personally feel people are beginning to adjust because, one, there's been an awful lot of outside help with these people to adjust. And I just think that with everyone helping out, it certainly has made a big difference.
I think it's been a real physical experience. I think some people have felt the loss very physically, and people at school have comforted each other very physically. There's been a lot of hugging. There's been a lot of open crying. There's been a lot of acknowledgement that some people don't feel that close to the experience. There's been quite a bit of variety.
That's one thing that's helped out, is that this, before the space shuttle, we as a community were one, and we as a school were one. At the time, nobody could believe it, but after the incident occurred, it brought us all together, and I think that helped out an awful lot.
One very quick question to both of you before we have to take a break, and I'd appreciate a very quick answer. Is this going to leave lasting scars? Not in the sense that you're ever going to forget it. I don't expect anyone to forget it. But lasting scars in terms of it changing you forever. Don, what do you think?
I don't know that the incident has changed me. I know Miss McAuliffe has changed me. She's just a woman who went out with victory and went out with the words full throttle, the way she went at life.
EILEEN O'Hara?
She changed me personally. I think this incident is going to make a difference in my life. Yes, if anything, it'll teach people not to give up, that they should try new things and take challenges.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm glad you could be with us tonight. Appreciate it very much.
Sure.
When we come back, 2 experts on children join our discussion, Dr. Lee SALK, noted child psychologist, and Dr. Irving Phillips, president of the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. Do they agree on the impact of the shuttle disaster on children? In a word, No. One psychologist said today, the worst thing an adult can do is to try to ignore or dismiss the impact of the space shuttle tragedy on a child. It may also be possible, however, to make too much of it. Joining us now to discuss that issue in our New York studios, Dr. Lee SALK, professor of psychology, psychiatry, and pediatrics at the New York Hospital, Cornell Medical Center. And in our San Francisco bureau, Dr. Irving Phillips, director of child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of California at San Francisco. Dr. SALK, let me take you back to my opening point, that of the teacher who asked his students today how many of them had trouble sleeping last night, and he raised his hand, and they all raised their hands. Do we not sometimes project on children what we expect them to feel, thereby making it become reality?
Yes, that can certainly be the case. I think that's not true in this particular case. There were real tears, there was real shock. I don't think anyone can belittle or underestimate a situation where you have a nation viewing an experience that we expect to be a great celebration, a moment in history where we want to share the joy and happiness. And instantly, this turns into an incredible tragedy, totally unexpected, and where the nation not only experiences it, but sees the faces of those people closest to the individuals on that spaceship. We were all able to share those feelings, and I would say that many of the children who viewed this from classrooms were able to realize that everyone feels grief, everyone is shocked, everyone is in a state of disbelief momentarily, and that their feelings are essentially the same as everyone else.
I have no trouble with the word grief. I have no trouble with the word shock. But sometimes I suspect that what we're trying to suggest here is that an inordinate number of children are almost going through a trauma. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they are. I would certainly they're going through a trauma. This is indeed an appropriate, shocking experience.
All right, let me see now, Dr. Phillips. I'd like to get your reaction to everything that we've talked about this far in the program.
Mr. Koppel, I don't think there's any question that kids go through shock and that they're experiencing some sadness. And children have a resilience in order to deal with national tragedy, especially if they're helped by their parents or teachers, and deal with it, put it in its place, and move on. The little girl said it very, very well when she said, I talked to my parents about it, they explained it to me, we both cried, I think I got it out of my system, and I'm ready to move on. Most kids, the great majority of kids, are going to experience that very same reaction.
All right, but that is exactly what I meant when, in my very non-professional, non-expert way, tried to draw a distinction between grief and trauma. Grief, I think, is perfectly understandable. Trauma suggests something more lasting to me. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying, with some few exceptions, you don't expect the grief to be lasting or to have a lasting effect.
I'm convinced that is the case. I think most children are going to, like most adults, are going to deal with the sadness. It is a sad event. It touched us all. It was a poignant moment in our lives, but they're going to deal with it and move on. The president said it very well. He said, we've experienced grief. We have to work it out. We are going to deal with it, and we're going to move on. All right,
but he was talking as a political leader, not as a specialist in psychology.
It was good psychiatric advice at the same time.
All right.
Parents have to help their children deal with these feelings. They shouldn't be afraid to talk to them. They should let them express them. They should try and explain the best they can in their own words what took place, what they know of death, and let the child deal with his feelings from there. And if again they need help, they'll come back to their parents to talk about it again. That's the essence of the matter.
Dr. SALK, I mean, that sounds like awfully good common sense advice.
Well, it is, and I certainly don't disagree. I simply feel that we have to encourage the children to express. We have to give them permission to express their feelings, and we have to give them the opportunity of seeing how we express our own grief so that they do not feel isolated and alone. And I do believe that the answer to the question is to give children the opportunity to talk about this. Now, the questions that children ask about events like this are sometimes very difficult for parents and teachers to answer. They want very concrete answers to very specific questions like what happened to their bodies, where are they now, this sometimes creates a great deal of difficulty for parents and teachers because they don't want to discuss and be graphic about.
Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Salk, that we shouldn't perseverate on these questions, that keep them going and keep something that's ready to be put in its place alive and charged and causing difficulty?
Well, I certainly do, but I don't think we're ready yet. I think we're all still in a state of shock. I think we have many weeks and perhaps months and years to come before we'll be able to accept this fully. I think this is not something we can push. Some of us may be able to.
There, gentlemen, if I may.
I agree that it's going to take us months and years.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point I wanted to focus on, and I'm going to ask you to kind of condense this a little bit because we're running out of time. It may be possible, may it not, to get over it in a matter of another couple of days, Dr. Salk?
Yes, I would say for some people it would be.
I think that for the majority of the kids, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, I wish I could predict
I can remember after the Kennedy assassination, we expected to see waves of kids to come in.
Well,
Nobody showed up.
Let me answer your question by simply saying that, yes, for some children who did not experience the McAuliffe family, I mean, one of the things that happened to this country was that through our television sets, we were introduced to the McAuliffe family. They were brought into our homes. We saw those poignant moments where the little McAuliffe child was saying to her mommy, "Please don't go away." Those are the things that made us react as parents and react even as children within ourselves. I mean, she symbolizes parents, she symbolizes teachers, and I think that for those people who did not experience that, they will be able to get over it very easily, perhaps, but the rest of us, or other people who are very close to that kind of thing, it will take a little bit longer. And I think the next time we have a space shuttle that's about to take off, you can be sure that millions of people will be watching. There will be a lot of prayers. There will be a lot of people who are going to be serious in a state of anguish and anticipation.
All right, Dr. Phillips, give me a quick response, if you will.
Of course that's true. But I think we should also recognize that we shouldn't keep alive something for childhood. We should allow the child to move ahead, to put into place what needs to be put into place. So he shouldn't be afraid of life. He should value it. And I think this gives them an opportunity to realize there's disappointment, there's heroes, there's villains, and all the rest.
Yeah, in no way am I suggesting that we interfere with that process.
No, I guess what I'm asking, and gentlemen, really, we are down to our last few seconds. What I'm asking is, what does each of you recommend, then, that we do nationally? Allow it as quickly as possible to pass from the scene, having obviously given not only permission, but even encouragement to children to talk about it, to ask questions, or do we focus on it for a long time to come yet? Quick answer, please.
I would certainly not focus on it. I think we're doing just what we need to do. I think this will pass like many tragedies pass. We'll remember it for all of our lives, but it's not going to paralyze us or put us in a position that we can't go on and do the kinds of things that we have to do in everyday living.
Dr. Salk.
I think we are a family. This country is a family, and we've approached this as one would any family event. I think that people have reached out, put their arms around one another, expressed collective grief, and I think we should let it take its natural course, and that is to give children the opportunity to express their feelings. There are some children that may be reluctant to do it. I think we should encourage them to do it so they don't repress some of their ideas, but we give them permission to do this without belittling them and by encouraging them to be part of this national family.
Gentlemen, I thank you both very much indeed. Dr. Lee Salk, Dr. Irving Phillips. I'd like to apologize to our affiliates. We've gone just a little bit over our allotted time. I hope you'll understand why we did it. I'll be back with a quick update to a story we did earlier this week when we come back.